Right. So yes, it's a bit more formal introduction at this point. It's my pleasure to have Dominic not very well, but I appreciate his presence. Yeah. So he's from Zurich. He recently finished his PhD at the Hub, and he's been working on natural language processing, automated fact checking, and with recent applications on climate change claims. And his work as he's actually should add that on fact checking. He was for a while top scoring system on the benchmark that we have created. So that's one of his claims to fame. But but he's doing more interesting things and on things that are interesting both of the groups that are here. So yes, over you.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, and I'm super happy to be here. I love this to be interactive. So like if I'm going too fast or too slow, if you have questions, if you don't understand me or don't understand what I'm saying, just interrupt me and have the questions all the time. I'm going to present work at the intersection of automated fact checking and climate change. So how can we automatically fact check climate change claims with large language models? And you see that there are quite a lot of authors on that project. And this is a very interdisciplinary team. We have people from finance and sustainable finance, economists, environmental economists, climate scientists, and so on. And I think that if you're doing interdisciplinary work, it's great to have an interdisciplinary team, otherwise they usually or things can go wrong. It can be okay, here we go. So I can only go forward. So then but then we'll try to make it. And the outline is sort of straightforward. I want to spend like 10 or 15 minutes sort of talking about automated fact checking, especially because I think half of the people in this room don't know too much. And then I want to talk for 5 minutes about what fact change claims look like, or consider the following fact checking from might not know that. And then we go to the method destruction for paper. It's basically GPT-4 and we'll show some results. And then I thought we are going to have an engaging discussion where you very much about it. I guess all of us sort of encountered misinformation before. This is a bit of a tautological definition from Wikipedia, like misinformation is just incorrect or misleading information. And this is perceived to be a major threat. So these days, if you're going to do a survey in a democracy, like in the US, and European Union, and US citizens, what they're afraid of, they usually will, like misinformation will rank quite high on all those. And that is because it does diminish the quality of news and it does diminish the quality of public discourse. It could also undermine the election process. So because this is perceived to be a major threat, people have thought about how to counteract misinformation. One of the things which seems to work, and there's a growing body of literature supporting that, is fact checking. So you have journalists or experts taking claims and do a thorough fact checking. Probably two mechanisms for why it works. The first one is it reduces sharing. People are just more reluctant to share stuff on the internet if it's right next to a big red "This is fake news" banner. So the second mechanism of fact checking is that it also reduces production. People seem to be more reluctant to spread fake news if they think that they might be getting fact checked. And but then all of this is very time consuming, and you need experts to actually do that. So this process, unfortunately, is not scalable. And then one of the solutions, hopefully, to mitigate that could be automated fact check. Why don't we just have computers which automate the task of fact checking? And this is, work which has been done on this side of the room.
Just one question about that. How antagonistic are those effects of fact checking? So could I deploy it as an offensive way to reduce the production of news I don't want to get out there with kind of fake fact checks themselves?
Yeah, I don't really know about that. So like, perhaps let me quickly say what that Nihan paper do. Like, they send letters to American local politicians running for an office, and they just tell them, hey, there's, PolitiFact opened a office nearby lately, and there's a chance that you might get fact-checked in the near future. And people who got a letter were less likely to produce misinformation. So I think this is something not very related to how ethical it is. Yeah. And this here is a climate change claim, which apparently is false. This gentleman here is Al-Jabbar. He was the president of COP28. And at some point in November, he said there's no science or scenario that says that the phase out of fossil fuel is what's going to achieve 1.5 degrees. And my understanding is that the climate scientist community has been sort of shocked by what this guy was saying. He's also the executive president of the state oil company in the UAE. So that's perhaps why he's not interested in phasing out of fossil fuel. But then by and large, there's a consensus that this claim is not true. And also that has been in the newspapers in November and December. At the same time, there's a...
So can I just...
Please.
So there is a slight complication on that.
Okay.
Which might be relevant to the fact checking thing as well. So Miles Allen also got in, everyone came down on full bricks on him because he sort of rightly said that actually this is true. So he's a climate scientist and IPCC author. Because like strictly speaking, it probably is true in that it is true that this 1.5 scenarios, you could have some fossil fuels. It doesn't necessarily, if you had lots of CCS, for example, etc. Right? So it's not quite as simple as saying it's definitely not true.
Okay, and this is, and this sort of is the reason why all of this is complicated. I'm not a climate scientist, I'm a computer scientist. This is what I've been told by climate scientists. So I hope like there, or at least some people think that this is not true.
It is mostly not true.
Yeah, okay, let's leave it there. Yeah. And at the same time, Falkenberg and others had a paper in 2022 where they showed that polarization has increased a lot during COP26. Polarization didn't seem to be much of a problem in previous editions of COP. And I like to think that increase in polarization strongly correlates with increases in misinformation and fake news. That's my intuition. I'm not sure whether there's actual evidence for that, but if you disagree with that, let me know. And this here is what automated fact-checking used to look like in 2018 until 2022. So you sort of start with a bit of an artificial claim, like Harry Ellis was born in 1982. And then you try to have a computer search a knowledge base, like possibly Wikipedia. And then you want to retrieve all the relevant documents which are needed to support or refute that claim. A good choice here is the Wikipedia page about Harry Ellis for obvious reasons. But then this page has lots of sentences. You just want the actual information needed, so you extract the relevant sentences. And here it says that he's born in 1962, and which contradicts the claim, therefore the evidence reduces. And that's something people have been doing quite a lot. They I guess the most famous paper, which has been developed by James Bourne, a former PhD student of Andreas. And then people realize that if you train systems on keyword, apply them in other domains, things usually don't work great. I also tried that a lot. It just usually never works. So people follow up with very similar data sets in the scientific domain, climate change domain, in the public health domain. But then those data sets always used to be sort of artificial. And Andreas, you had a question?
No,
No. Yeah. So the essence of automated fact checking, I guess, is that you need a data set on which you can train models, but then you also need a knowledge base from which you can retrieve evidence you actually trust. And yeah, we'd better have that for the climate change domain, but there are some issues with that, and that is that creating such a data set is usually a huge effort and is very expensive. And automated fact checking arguably and looks a bit different since ChatGPT has come out in late 2022. If somebody has not seen ChatGPT before, let me know. Yeah. And this year is my favorite use case of ChatGPT. If you have a citation which is not in big text, you can just convert it.
Done it accurately.
And yes.
most of them.
And that's a bit of a life hack. I used to do that manually or use like all those crappy online converters. This is so, and that also has changed how natural language processing has been done. And like it's sort of a paradigm shift. You do have better and better models. So natural language processing, arguably for the first time, is actually useful in real life. Like it's sort of
That is too much, sorry. I think a slightly more subtle version of that would be better.
Okay, that probably was too strong of a claim. But then it gets unclear how this affects automated fact checking, but I guess most of us agree that this sort of, you have artificial claim search some evidence that refutes or supports the claim is not how we're going to move forward. And in this talk, I sort of present how we see it in this paper, but then other views also exist. And Andreas does have some recent follow-up papers where they also do things differently. And happy to discuss that. So the cool thing with ChatGPT or all those models is that they can do zero-shot learning, so you don't need a training set anymore, or they can do it in context learning, have some reasoning capabilities. And that's just fantastic because this makes way more tasks accessible. You don't have high handling errors anymore. And another thing which I think there starts to be a consensus on is that retrieval augmented generation seems usually to be better than just doing zero-shot. And that is, if you have a question, you'd better also retrieve some relevant information to answer that question, and then these models do way better. Like first, they're not hallucinating that much. That is, they're sort of faithful towards the context you provide. Also, those models usually have knowledge cutoff, so a model has been trained until that point. If you ask stuff about what's going on later, you're sort of in unkind territory. If you have retrieval augmented generation, you don't necessarily have a problem. And then there are also more accurate customers. And some work we did last year is chat climate. This is just a wrapper around GPT-4 for like climate science. And basically, this does retrieval augmented question answering with the IPCC report as a background knowledge. And we're doing something very similar to automated fact checking. And now the cool thing is you don't need a training set anymore, but you still sort of need a test set. Like, you know, your model produces stuff. Like you want to evaluate how accurate it is, what your model does. And here we scraped two sources, which often fact check climate change related claims. The first one is climate feedback, and the second one is skeptical science. And I think both are NGOs, and they have climate scientists fact-checking claims manually. And then we have like 300 or 400 of these claims, and we use that to evaluate. And this is an example claim from the Washington Post saying that more than 75% of the rainforests are losing resilience, and that more than half of it could be converted into a savanna. And then this seems to be mostly accurate because 75% is correct, but the savanna line apparently is sort of misleading because the rainforest seems to be losing biodiversity and diminished capacity to store carbon, but I think it's unlikely that it'll actually perfectly with that. So again, I sort of had this to showcase how complicated all of this is, but thanks to your comment before, we already knew that. And then, like at some point in summer 2023, Andreas gave a talk in London, I think, and some people I know were in the audience back then, and all of them texted me, were like, Andreas is giving a talk. And especially Marcus, the lead author of that paper, said that this sort of was the inspiration for all we're doing. And what Andreas argues for here, I think, let me know if that's not like this.
Yeah, sure.
Sort of is that if you do fact checking, this kind of is a top-down thing, but it could also be a bottom-up thing where you have different people exchanging different points of views, and hopefully eventually you reach a consensus, and that sort of is your fact check.
It's fine. I will, I think it's your talk, I give my talk another time. Let alone that I probably have changed my mind since 4 years ago, I think.
So in any case, Marcus texted me while Andreas was giving the talk. It was like, imagine if large language models would debate with each other, and that is the fact checking. And that's sort of what you're trying to state. We do have different advocates. And this graphic is somewhat unfortunate, but this sort of means that each advocate has access to a knowledge base from which it would perform a fact check. And sort of you somehow have to imagine that there's a claim going in, then you have prompting of your large language model, which provides a verdict and appropriate reasoning because it has access to documents from a knowledge base. And because we want to simulate that debate, we have quite a few of those different advocates, which all have access to different knowledge bases. This sort of is the same thing spelled out in very verbose pseudocode. So you start with a claim going into your large language model, then you iterate through all your advocates. Each one generates a verdict, a rationale, and references. The references are basically the retrieval augmented part. Then you concatenate all of that. You give that to a mediator, which again is GPT-4, which would then take all of that and try to identify whether there's a consensus. If not, it would ask follow-up questions back to the advocates. If there is a consensus, it would sort of summarize everything the advocates produced and better fact check that. The knowledge bases we use in our work are the most recent IPCC report, that's 7 PDFs. Like those chapters from the 3 working groups are quite long. They're, I think, 2,000 pages or so. So that's lots of text. We also have several technical documents from the WMO and 2 versions of scientific abstracts. The first one being all abstracts which have climate change somewhere in the title or abstract. The other one being an abstract is by somebody who's in that Reuters S1000 list, and that apparently are the most famous climate scientists out there. But I don't exactly know what it is. And we do information retrieval just with embedding similarities. So you have an OpenAI model embedding your claim and all those chunks in those documents, then you just do cosine similarities.
Can I just ask, is there a reason you're just using the abstracts rather than full papers?
Yes, Like, it's a economic answer. If you have 200,000 or 300,000 papers, like we sort of pay for every
Yeah, okay.
embedding, and that just gets a bit too expensive.
That's a related question. So how did you chunk the IPCC reports?
Like we sort of had an PDF text and then chunked it into, I think, 500 separate chunks, but sort of that they're overlapping by 100 words. So your first chunk would be words 0 to 500, your second keyword 400 to 800, and we sort of, I think this is what's been implemented in lab launching. And it sort of prevents that if, you would have the split of a very important sentence, which you want to retrieve by word 500, then you're having some incoherent sentence there.
Do you think that would work better than, because the IPCC reports are obviously organized into relatively neat chapters?
Yeah.
Would it be better or worse to just use the actual chapters?
It probably would be better. We should have done it. Yeah. But then we should be more careful about that whole definition of language. That sort of was what we started with, and then it seemed to work, and then we just left. And this again is this 1.5 degree claim, and sort of this here is the moderator summary of what the IPCC advocate produces, and this sort of goes along the lines of the reports detail the need for rapid integration of renewable energy and highly phasing out of fossil fuels. Level of evidence and agreement is high, and the verdict is that the claim is incorrect. And like all of the advocates produce something along those lines, and then you have a final summary where the user claim that there is no science or scenario. That's just the claim. The claim has been assessed as incorrect based on the evidence provided by the WMO, IPCC, and S1000 advocates. They all indicate that phase out is a necessary component. And then the scientific abstracts advocates is sort of more vague. Yes.
Can I ask a question that's sort of about, there's this word, sort of necessity here, sort of.
Yeah.
I guess one reading of Al-Jabbar's comment is that it sort of, is it about necessity or is it about sufficiency? So I'm not deeply in climate science, so I can't give you an argument, but if the one reading of the quote is, there's no science out there that says that the phase out of fossil fuels is what's going to be sufficient to achieve 1.5.
Yeah.
Versus whether it's necessary, and the what's been generated there is about necessity rather than sufficiency. So this is often a kind of a thing that can be a bit implicit in speech, and there's really, I don't really know how to parse Al-Jabbar's quote on the left either. I mean, it could mean a lot of different things. So how's that handled, at least? How you factor that into things?
Let me just answer that in a very angry way. Like it's sort of handled by how the GPT-4 implicitly guesses what we want it to do. So, but we haven't, explicitly modeled any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's sort of whatever probabilistically comes out about whether it thinks it's a claim of necessity or sufficiency. You kind of don't know which one it's.
Yes.
It makes me think it's thinking about necessity based on what it's then generating.
Yes, absolutely. And like perhaps this doesn't do justice to like all the complexities of that claim, or like it certainly is.
But could you insert things? I don't know the right way, but it's essentially insert the word necessarily or is sufficient for, and get two different readings out. You could ask GPT to insert it in the right place so it's grammatical, and then get the two different pathways.
That's an interesting one. Like, let me just show you sort of our system prompts. Let me just say that like this is sort of because I can't go back. Like we just have lots of different claims in our data, but most of them are occur ever, so we sort of combine them into 7 classes, 5 classes, or just a binary correct incorrect or correct. Which makes evaluation a bit easier. Then to go back to what we just said, sort of this is the system. And it sort of goes along the lines of what we want the model to do. We have some guidelines. We have an assessment process and then instructions on what the response form should be. And I guess one could either insert here that the model should evaluate based on sufficiency or necessity. Or we could try, as you suggested, to insert that automatically into the claims itself. Now, I'm sort of reluctant to insert that here because my experience with prompt engineering is that we're sort of back in the 1990s where people did rule-based systems, which worked to a certain extent. Then you started to have those edge cases, you added new rules which were conflicting with other rules, then eventually everything broke. And to me, prompt engineering is just very similar to that. But we should give it a try.
Yeah, but just as a slightly pressing this for further, because I actually think you thought you took what you thought was going to be a clear cut yes no case, and actually is that a particular case you've chosen is actually really quite complicated. in an interesting way, and that's probably an interesting kind of test case for what you're wanting to do. But so I'm a climate scientist, at the so I think that if a climate scientist read the IPCC report, they would probably have to conclude that the statement is true. Yeah. Although might want to say that, you know, actually, but there are kind of context nuances that mean that it's more, you know, it's more complicated than perhaps is being presented. But I suspect that in terms of the words in the IPCC report, it might be difficult to extract the words to say that it was true. But if you looked at the graphs and the data in the IPCC report, I think you'd have to conclude that it's true.
Yeah.
So that's an extra thing, like the words in the report itself and not all the content.
Yeah. This is one of the limitations here. Like we, for now, just parse the text because reasoning over tables is hard as Ron can tell you. Reasoning over images is also difficult. But we hope that eventually this will become more accessible. But yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So more broadly, the issue is that natural language statements where humans are inherently ambiguous, right? I mean, I think you mentioned that already. So when you do fact check, I think what Dominic was suggesting was to make it less ambiguous by adding words to say necessary or sufficient, which makes a statement. Because I mean, I read this statement several times, and it's very hard to make out, you know, what does the word is mean? Is it is necessarily or is sufficient? Yeah. Right, and I think your answer comes down to that. So, it's the case that you overshoot 1.5 degrees no matter what, even if you stop fossil fuels today, right? If you overshoot 1.5 degrees in face of the fossil fuels, it's not going to help. It's already, you may as well, you know, it's going to make things a lot worse, but it's also true factually that we've already overshot 1.5. So that's why I think you're saying it's true because we overshot it. But the thing is, but my real question is, can you add to your system the ability to disambiguate or to come back to the user to say, I can't tell you the facts are true or false because it's too ambiguous?
And I guess like we're sort of trying to do that implicitly now, but then perhaps or likely you're actually like, I think what you're saying is true, and we should do that more explicitly than the way we are handling it. What we're sort of doing is if the system doesn't find enough information, so whatever that means, then it would just return to the user that the system can engage in determination. And we sort of hope that this would take care of some of the ambiguous cases, but yeah, like I'm still a bit puzzled because to me that ultra marketing didn't seem to be that ambiguous, which is why I chose that. Yeah, I'm gonna learn from next time.
So, sorry, just a factual question. Are you literally just putting in that sentence by itself, or are you giving the context of what the speaker said?
Of course, Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the context would often disambiguate,
Mhm.
in the cases of ambiguity.
Yeah.
And in any case, I do actually think that to talk about true and false things like this is just not what's going on anyway. There's a context of what was happening, of what an intended effect of that utterance was. And so if you go to certain linguistic traditions, that's what would be emphasized, not the true false. So I just wanted to put that in just to make sure that the people on that side of the table are aware that, we know, I mean, we know we're oversimplifying on this side of the table, but I just wanted to make it clear that we know we are.
And like we're not contextualizing claims.
Mm.
A part of saying that this is a climate change related claim, because if you don't add that, things sometimes go wrong. And that is because if you, like, we mostly analyze claims from climate impact and skeptical science, and there you usually don't have the context in why and where they have been uttered. So we would just be guessing why that claim is on that website. But like if we could contextualize, that would certainly help. But I just think often, like if you go to social media, you also often don't have context, you just have the tweet.
But you should be able to get the context right. I mean, it's just information retrieval. So
Yeah, okay, yes. Okay, I agree with that. Yeah, we should look into that more.
I guess the follow on there is there an intermediate rating that you need to do, which is the quality of the structure of the claim versus the actual contents of the claim?
Like, we're not really doing that yet. But if we were to apply, like, because we sort of think what comes into our system so far have been claims from climate change fact checks. So we sort of think that all of that is valid input. But if we were to deploy that into the wild, then we certainly should do that.
Got it. Here's a question online as well from Harriet. I didn't go ahead.
No, thank you. I'm glad about the discussion in the room about context, and also that ambiguity is useful, and there's a kind of a fact check issue, not just with this. I think this approach is really exciting and useful, but just the use of the word fact check may start to mean that we end up having a kind of very binary mindset around information. But I think my main issue around ambiguity has been covered by two questions that have been raised already, so thank you.
So you're saying that calling this.
I found the early discussion earlier. I'm concerned. I think what you've done is really useful, but I'm just concerned that the more and more we start, I mean, this is to try and answer in a very binary way, fact checking, our mindsets and the discussion we have between people becomes much more around truth and untruth, when actually things are more complicated. So it's not the methodology you've deployed, it's just how this might lead us to increasingly look in a polarized or binary way at things.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like it sort of comes down to that all of this. There are just lots of nuances to it. It's complicated stuff. And are there more questions on this here or follow-ups on that discussion? Because
Sure. The prompt itself,
Yes.
was that a one shot and it worked, or did you do some tuning on it?
we did tuning on it, but like this, perhaps the 5th or 10th iteration. Like we started with that Al-Jabbar thing, and then we, just prompted it until we got it to what we thought is the correct, and then we took these.
Right, so the tuning wasn't done on your test set, it was done just on that one?
Yes.
Okay.
This year is the results for climate impacts just on those two labels, which we just discussed, doesn't do justice to the complexity of all of this. But then we think this is useful, and here we are. like if our model says with, and it does have very high accuracy on t-space we tested it on. If it says that something probably is misinformation around climate change, then we think this would be a good building step for something that climate scientists might want to invest some time in. Whereas if the model says that something probably is correct, then a climate scientist could just read it sort of and wait and save some time there. And this is why we have that experiment.
Quick question.
Sure.
You may come on to this later, but can you explain a little bit more? What does the debate actually look like? Like, what is the moderator doing? Like, is it talking to individual advocates, or is it trying to organize a debate? Like, are all of the advocates talking with each other, or how does it work?
Yes, and the advocates are not talking to each other. So an advocate gets a claim and retrieves 15 terms from its knowledge base, and then writes a word or reason. And then the moderator takes all of these things which the advocates produce and summarizes it for us, and then tries to understand whether there's consensus or not. If there is consensus, it would sort of give back ask questions to the advocates and say something along the lines of, the other advocates disagree with that thing on X and Y. And then the advocates would take that and return that.
And are you just going until like the advocate basically? Like I'm confused how like say one advocate is disagreeing with all the other advocates.
Yes.
Is this forcing that one advocate until it agrees with the other advocates, or can it fight and win against the other one?
And we have one experiment on that. But the short answer is we just stop after one round of follow-up questions, and then the moderator sort of takes the majority. But perhaps let me add 2 more sentences on this. First, GPT-4 alone is already quite good at doing that. And then the individual advocates are all, or like the IPCC advocate is slightly better than GPT-4, the others are worse. And this is because often individual advocates refuse to answer a question because they don't have enough information, so sort of, but ensemble all of that does give you a performance boost. So we think that this is a valid way of going about things. If we do that for 7 labels, our results get way worse. So there's still lots of room for improvement. But then, like whether something is mostly correct or somewhat correct is just a very difficult question. And I'm not sure how objectively answerable that is with computers. But there's still room of improvement. And I guess the findings from before replicate here, though, that GPT-4, like the individual advocates are sort of involved as GPT-4 without any additional information. But if you combine all the advocates, you sort of get something which is better than GPT-4. Yes.
What does the test data use for this result?
And it's all the claims straight from the website climate feedback and the associated labels. There is one catch here, and that is GPT-4 might have seen some of the claims in its training data, but we do not observe differences between the claims prior to the knowledge cutoff and after the knowledge cutoff. And also we don't think it memorized all of that completely, because otherwise those numbers here probably would be better. Yeah.
What's the baseline if the model is just taking the majority? Because you said that the quite often it's just they're not just responding because they haven't got that information in their knowledge bases. So what's the baseline? It's just majority.
And it sort of depends how you measure maturity. Like if you just do accuracy, I think maturity would be sort of 50%. But the algorithm sort of is designed to push down the impact of the maturity.
I think that's a too detailed question. Another time.
Okay, yes. And we do the same thing for skeptical science claims. The problem there is that we don't have a label, we just have a claim and the article on skeptical science. So we try to derive that verdict automatically with GPT-4 again. And we look through some of those and they seem to be quite good. And then we use those as pseudo labels and we again measure accuracy and we sort of see that Climinator, like that's the name of our system, seems to be quite good.
Yes. So the zero-shot GPT-4 version does not use iterative augmented generations?
Yes, that's just.
Okay, and so you know what happens if you would have one GPT-4, also one advocate that uses as the knowledge source all different knowledge bases instead of individually?
Yeah, and we have not done that experiment. And when I was writing those slides yesterday, I sort of was thinking why we did not do that experiment. I can't answer that. But it's something we would like to, or I think we have to explore. Otherwise, like if that better than this yeah. So thanks a lot for the comment. So let me give you some preliminary takeaways on something else. And like low accuracy is mostly driven by not reducing transfer. But we haven't had follow-up questions yet in any of those claims. And we think this is because there seems to be a large scientific consensus within the knowledge bases of the advocates. And we also think that the binary setting is potentially useful already, and the binary setting is the one where we have quite good accuracy. So, and now we did something which I like, but I'm happy to take criticism on it. So we put the IPCC report, which sort of is associated with the climate denial movement. That organization does write reports as well. And it positions itself as the truthful alternative to the IPCC. Is that about correct? Or I was told that this is what's going on. And then we sort of implement that as an adversarial advocate. And now the mediator gets conflicting summaries with conflicting stances and then asks follow-up questions. And you sort of see the F1 for just our system without that advocate is 90%. If we have this adversarial thing, it drops by like 40%. But then after asking follow-up questions, it sort of climbs back up to where it was before. And we like to think that this shows that what we're doing is sort of robust to adversarial circumstances. And then we took that to actually analyze the NICCP executive summaries. So we extracted all the claims from there and automatically fact-checked them with our system. And we find that only 16% of those claims seem to be mostly accurate based on, the other reports, which I guess makes sense because it's sort of adversarial. But then if we take the NIPCC advocate itself, this one also cannot really support the claims made in the executive summary. So we think that there seems to be sort of some inconsistency in there. And I think I'm running out of time, and this is also where I'd like to stop. So I talked about introducing automated fact-checking of climate change claims with large language models. As we have seen during the lively discussion so far, there seems to be some pushback, and I do agree with some of with all of the criticism, but it is still some. And we have an ensemble of GPT-4 advocates. Each one has access to a dedicated knowledge base. And we like to think that this simulates a deliberative process of fact-checking. And we also think that this adversarial setting using another advocate has benefits. The first one being it does add multiple perspectives. But then it also sort of reminds me to the community notes on Twitter, like where you have to have people where you have to have bipartisan support for a fact check for that to be actually displayed. And we also think that this might add legitimacy if that were to be deployed. We have lots of follow-up, like we want to improve information retrieval. And in Ameritech, there are also some climate change related things, so we probably could fact check those, and thanks a lot, Ron, for the suggestion. And then we also want to just wait for the next generation of large language models, and then we think everything just becomes way better. And then, you know, just review what it is so far. In other future work, we hopefully partner with Logging Lab soon, and that's a NGO in the UK which tracks logging efforts by oil and gas industries, and we hope that our framework could help them automatically fact check those logging efforts. I personally want to work on detecting company greenwashing, so with LLMs as EA0 plus CO2 zero, that is a misleading environmental claim, and I'd love to develop methods which can detect those automatically, and we sort of hope that this advocate-based framework can help in both. And there is a bit of advertisement. This is one workshop at ACM, which we are organizing. If you have some work at the intersection NLP and climate change, feel free to submit there. The deadline is in 5 days or in 7 days. And this is a workshop at the IJCAI. It's organized by people from Stanford and KAIS. I'm one of the program editors, or like the people who decide which papers get accepted. And the deadline for that is in 10 days, and I also quickly want to mention that. And this is sort of more broad, just AI and sustainability. And this is the conclusion again. Thank you.
Really naive, but it's to get me thrown out of the room. Is it automated fact checking or is it automated bias checking?
Yeah.
Right, because I could easily generate something that says the IPCC report is correct, if I chose a different source.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I would love to give that question to Andreas. but like it's something I've been thinking about as well. So like you know, that technology sort of seems to be useful, but then it could also get sort of adversarial if it's being used.
So I guess one way I could see was potentially trying to use that would be, is there a way to tie the assessment back through to any ground truths? Like you go through, you've trained it on a bunch of websites, is there any way to understand what their sources were? Like, can you go through to primary?
And yeah, I think currently we cannot. Right, like also use commercial large language models, which we can only track using an API. But if we have our own models and know how they were trained and so on, perhaps there is a possibility to get there, but that does require us to understand better what this concept is. But like it's a good question.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Do you have a sense for how well you do on true but misleading claims?
I think that's the which maybe one good.
And then like also how do you define misleading if you're not taking it context?
Like the short answer perhaps is that there is a category of misleading claims.
Okay.
And we are not substantially better or worse on those than on other claims.
Okay.
But then like you know, take that with a grain of salt on like those fine grained classifications, we have like 35% at one, which is just not bad.
Yeah. Okay.
But then also there are just a few data points in there, so you're basically valuing like 10.
Okay.
So, okay, for some reason I can go back, but then it stops sharing. We should ask and why. Again, with which slide you want to like perhaps.
Yeah, that's sort of, you can't see that, but this year would be the misleading creativity.
And that on this y-axis label there is.
The frequency, 80%.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of exciting work on simulation-based inference at the moment where you can actually take some mechanistic model and use that to guide machine learning. So do you think that that would help with fact checking if we had a computation model of facts that were real?
Yeah.
And then use that to guide what this is using to check?
Like, I hope, but I think things might also get more complicated because you might have facts which disagree with each other. Or could you?
Well, imagine that you mechanize the IPCC projection, right? So you've got a data structure to describe all the different pathways and stuff. So you do have one thing that we can agree on as now people might disagree on the computation model, but assume that that's the thing. You need some root for your facts.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the problems here comes down to the difference between bias and fact.
Mhm.
And if you're not grounding facts through something, it would seem very, very difficult to converge.
Right. Like we sort of thought about that as well. Like now, if we were just to take the IPCC report, I guess I would get pushback from the audience because people would then argue that the IPCC report is like this minimal compromise. Climate scientists can actually agree on, but it's also not perfect. So we sort of try to mitigate that by having multiple knowledge bases. But yeah, if we could have like a set of facts everybody agrees on, and we're sort of certain that these are absolutely true, then it would make sense. But I guess it would more things are just being like less black and white and more grayish. Yeah,
you tested like the accuracy of the statements in the NIPCC, like at the end.
Yeah.
Did you do that for the other knowledge sources?
No.
Because it might be interesting to see how well those things are supported by the text themselves. Or
Yes, fully agree. Like that's a fantastic suggestion. We do not think.
Kind of a practical question. So obviously, so was every advocate here at GPT-4?
Yes.
So obviously that's kind of insanely expensive. Did you try like simulating the other agents within a single instance of a GPT-4 conversation?
Don't think so. We tried it with GPT 3.5, but that was just lots of blah blah. And so we sort of think there need to be capable LLMs. And we have tried with single instance, which are sort of hope that costs will go back in the near future because of competition there. But that would be something we also should.
We are at time, so I think we should thank Dominic again and conclude. Thank you very much. Thank you. Changing every